Oh, thanks, lady.
Hey, everybody, welcome to the last day of Culturama, and this is the second to last event. This is Shun Lai talking about how to make a living as a writer. We've had a lot of publishers come in and talk about how to do small press publication. This is going to be a little bit different. This is someone who has made a living as a writer for a good long time and does it well. My favorite credit that Yishin has is that she was J. Peterman for the J. Peterman catalog. And I might be saying that wrong, but that's the way I always think of it.
I love that so much. Let's see, hang on just a second. I'm just trying to adjust things because whenever I do my turn on my presentation, it actually like shunts Zoom off to another screen somewhere. So, um, John, if it's okay with you, do I have sharing capabilities?
Let me make you a co-host.
Okay, great. Great. All right. Oops, that just turns on a poll here. Alrighty, here we go. Boop. We're gonna share. Okay, you guys can see this wonky screen here now, right? Yeah, give me a nod, somebody. Yes, okay, terrific. All right, and we're going to play from the start. Okay, so here's the thing about making a living as a writing, right? Um, I think this is one of these things that people misunderstand on a regular basis, right? I gave a talk at my alma mater a couple of years ago. Probably now, what is time, anyways? Nobody really knows. I gave a presentation. I think it was now 8 years ago now, and one of the students there asked me, "Can you actually make a living as a writer anymore?" And I was like, yeah, that's a very interesting question. But at the bottom of the day, it really depends on what you actually mean by making a living as a writer, right? If you mean that you're able to spend all of your time lying on your back, staring at the spackle in your ceiling, generating fun ideas, and then maybe writing them down or maybe not writing them down, well, no, probably not. Okay, that's not a thing you can do. The truth is, making a living as a writer actually involves a lot of support. Okay, and we're going to talk about some of that support today. And in fact, we'll launch into it from the very beginning. But really, this is a presentation about what that actually looks like, right? What it actually means to make a living from your creativity. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I do it. Okay, what it means for me is basically working smarter and not harder. Okay, that's a key part of it. All right, and it also means making sure that you expand the impact that you have on the world in order to be able to create a name for yourself and leverage all of that creativity, not just on the page and in the work that you're doing for yourself, but also so that you can contribute to the broader world of creativity to begin with. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're going to do a quick exercise. This is 60 seconds. And you know what I've forgotten to do is I've forgotten to grab my watch, which I'll actually, no, I don't need it because there's a timer going off here. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is an exercise from Twyla Tharp, who is a well-known choreographer. And what she does is she encourages people when she's speaking, when she's speaking live, she'll wander around backstage and then she'll actually go and pick a random object and make people write down uses for the object. Okay, so it's a hard exercise, but it's really, really fun. And one of the reasons we're doing this is because it is clinically proven that if you spend just a couple of minutes doing a creative exercise, it will allow you to be creative for a lot of the rest of the day. Okay, so we want you to carry that creativity through. So what I'm going to do is show you an object, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes to come up with 60 uses for it. Okay, it's a lot. It's a lot, but you can do it. I've absolute faith in you. Okay, ready? All right. Here's the object. You see it? It's a hair tie. Okay, that's one use. All right. I'm going to seed that for you. Okay. I'm going to give you another use. All right. It can be used for wrapping up newspapers. All right. That's two already. Now you only have to come up with 58. Ready? On your marks. 2 minutes. Get set. Go. 30 more seconds. Go ahead and wind it up. Okay, pencils down. How did that go for people? Yeah, good. Okay, all right. Anybody want to drop into the chat or shout out what they came up with? Don't be shy.
Keep your lobster claws closed.
Keeping your lobster claws closed. Good. Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I have floss for people with big gaps.
Floss for people with good gaps. Good. Okay. Terrific. Anybody else? Getting some feedback here.
Flicking, flicking objects at people.
Flicking objects, people. Good. Okay. Terrific. Is that feedback coming from me or from somebody else? Okay. Great. All right. Cute necklace for a bird. I love that, Kimberly. That's terrific. All right. Anybody else?
A water bottle identifier. You put it on your water bottle so nobody drinks out of it.
Great. Okay, good. All right. Where did people find their most creative ideas coming? Did the first couple come pretty easy for y'all? Yeah. Okay. And how? No, not not at all. All right. And how did people face towards the end of this exercise? Were you struggling or like how did it go? Yeah, struggling a lot. Okay. All right. Anybody get to 60? You got to 60? Really? No? Okay. All right. I was gonna say that's pretty impressive. What? How did you guys do? Did you come up with what? 20, 15, 10? I'm curious.
9.
9. Okay. Good. All right. Terrific. Okay. Looks like 7. Okay. Terrific. Good. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
7.
7. Okay. Terrific. All right. And what did the end of the list look like? Did it look like it was like? Was it? I mean, were you constipated? Did it feel like you were like? I mean, how did it feel? Was it just super hard all the way through?
To me,
It
that
was
was
toward the end the most creative came.
Okay. Good. All right, John.
that's exactly what I was going to say. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Yeah, this is all an exercise in discomfort, right? I mean, it's really hard to come up with 60 ideas for a hair tie. I have tried it. I can't do it, but it's also kind of fun to just like free associate at the end of the day and see what comes up, right? Okay. All right, great. Thank you for doing that with me, y'all. That was great. Okay. All right, so I'm just gonna do a quick, introduction for you about how I make my living. Folks are always asking where writers get their ideas, all right? And the truth is, I don't actually have that many ideas. I'm just really good at taking one idea and then like spinning it in lots of different directions and in lots of different iterations, okay? So what happens with these iterations is that they allow me to expand my status in different circles and they allow me to expand my income, okay? So I'm gonna start by letting you in on a thing that I think is really important for writers to start talking more about, and that's like how this actually happens, right? Okay, what the breakdown is of your income, all right? And if you don't know like how you're making your income or where you're spending your time, this is a good place to start. For years, I used a time tracker that's called Harvest. I will drop that link in the chat right now. Then there's also a free time tracking app that's called can't remember now. No, sorry, that's not useful because I actually paid for Harvest, right? And again, this sort of gets into the fact that I have some support around this and I have some financial capital so I can do that. But the reason time tracking is important is because it's nice for you to know where exactly you're expending your energy, all right? It's really, really critical for you to know how you're spending your time each day. We have this really unhealthy societal image of artists being super flaky people who, just kind of like, oh, spend their time, doing whatever with their heads in their clouds, so on and so forth. Okay. And that's just not true. Writers and artists work really, really hard at what we do, right? And those of us who make a living at it, well, we do things like making appointments and being on time for them. We hustle. We spend a lot of time hunting down new leads and different ideas. Okay. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about how that breaks down right now. Okay. Okay, so here's what it looks like for me. Sorry, I didn't realize that window was there, y'all. Okay, so my work life falls into 3 primary buckets, but I also need to let you know that the support that I mentioned before comes in lots of different forms, right? My husband has a full-time salary job, and that gives me really good health insurance. I don't have any student loans, and I inherited the house I live in, all right? I don't pay a mortgage, and I don't pay rent, okay? So I want to be absolutely clear right now that I have a set of advantages that allows me to take many more creative risks than probably many people do. All right. So the methods that I'm about to show you will help you to do more with your ideas, regardless of where you're starting from. But just so you know, what it breaks down as is these three things that I do. Okay. So I do a lot of teaching, and that breaks down into being adjunct faculty at 2 MFA programs, right? And I also do a lot of teaching at workshops nationwide. I also farm myself out to places who might need some teaching in terms of some online work or in terms of weekend workshops, right? I teach at the Piper Center in Arizona's Desert Nights Rising Stars conference every year. Okay, so all of these things that come up, they are ways for me to make income. All right. In my writing, I write books, and I have I have my magazine writing gig. The magazine writing gig is a column at the Writer magazine, for which I get paid a significant amount. And because it happens every single month, then I'm able to actually count that as an anchor client. Okay, so it keeps me writing and it keeps me thinking on a regular basis. In terms of writing books, well, we all know you don't publish a book a year unless you're James Patterson and you have a factory, okay, or Daniel Steele and you have a factory in your brain, okay, or Joan Didion and you have really awesome background to lean on, right, and you can count on being solicited to write these things, right. So anchor clients are really important into when it comes to, they're called anchor clients. That is the people who give you work every single month, all right. Books, I write one, or I'm trying to kind of hold myself to one every 5 years. Okay. So what that amounts to is some royalties. They're really negligible. But with that said, with the expertise that I can glean by saying, oh, I've written a book, in this vein or on this topic, then that gives me more clout to be able to pass on to hiring myself for more gigs. Okay. And then I also, by far, the thing that is the most lucrative on this list is a set of diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, which I've written a workbook around and which I then farm out to other folks. Okay. With that said, I want to be very clear that the reason it's on this list is because it's tied directly to my writing work. Okay. In all the classes that I teach, except for this one, which I've forgotten about, apparently, I identify myself as an East Asian woman who comes from a certain amount of money and who grew up capitalist and Republican. Okay. Why do I identify myself this way? Why do I use demographic markers? Because it changes the way that I read and it changes the way that I write. Okay. So what this does for me in terms of feeding into the DEI workshops is that from this unique perspective that I have living in these United States, occupying that particular set of demographic markers, is it allows me to be able to farm that experience into working in the diversity, equity, and inclusion fields. Okay, it has been a long evolution. It is a thing that I've been thinking about for a very long time. But once I wrote the workbook for diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, I was able to use that to actually, make more income in that way. Okay, I became a de facto expert in that field. All right. Okay, it's confusing. I know. Don't worry, it'll become clear later on. Okay. Okay, so what does it actually look like in real life? These are the actual credentials that I have, right? I have 2 published books. Again, I write a monthly essay for the Writer magazine. It is actually now turned into a package. It's a 4 to 5 page package, every single issue starting in January, that is entirely around making sure that we as readers broaden our bookshelves, i.e. that we're reading more diversely on a regular basis. Okay, I actually write essays and do some visual art whenever and wherever people who have me. I generally ask for pay, and that's a thing that we all need to get used to doing. Okay. Again, I teach at 2 universities. I'm a visiting faculty wherever and when I can. I also have a passion project that my passion projects are a thing that we have to be really careful about when it comes to actually using them, right? Because we all want to say that literature is a work of passion or that creativity is a work of passion, but I kind of think that devalues the work, right? Even if it is a work of passion, it is still work, okay? It is still money that comes out of your pocket. It's still time that you invest in it. It is still your past education or the education that you're currently gathering, right? That gets put into these projects. Okay, so don't make the mistake of believing that creative work isn't work. Okay. With that said, I am the founding editor of a little concern called Undomesticated Magazine. We were able to acquire a grant for it. It's a publication about women living broadly in the world, is the tagline. And the whole point is to redefine travel writing so that it doesn't fall into the category of like, oh, isn't this exotic, so on and so forth. Okay. Is it a passion project? Yeah, it's one passion project. I try not to have too many of them because they eat up my time, and I don't want to get volunteer fatigue, right? That's another thing you have to look out for when it comes to working in the literary field, okay? And then, as I pointed out, I am working on a novel right now that's a young adult novel, also a passion project, but something that lives in my own brain, so I give myself a little leeway for that. And I run these diversity, equity, and inclusion workshops, okay? All right, let's go on. Okay, so technically, here's how it breaks down. Remember how I was talking about the time breakdown before? I tracked my time for many, many years. I don't do it very often right now, just because I kind of know where I'm spending most of my time. It really is mostly teaching, right? 60% teaching, and then the rest of the 40% is dedicated to writing. Okay, so or writing related concerns. All right. Okay, so this is also how it breaks down in terms of money earned. Okay, most of my money comes from teaching. Okay, and the rest of it comes from writing. All right, so that's a pretty good breakdown. Two things. I'm defining these two terms very, very, very broadly. Okay, so if I do something that's related to writing, all right, i.e., maybe I'm not doing something creative, but I'm writing an exhibit for the local museum, right? I count that as writing income, okay? It is still putting words on paper, right? It may not be generating a novel or getting published in a literary magazine, but I'll tell you right now, literary magazines pay crap, okay? I got published in Brevity, last May, I want to say. Brevity is a huge publication. It's really, really well funded. The essay was 750 words, and they paid me $45 minus the $9 that I had spent submitting to them. I submitted to them 3 times. It's $3 per time. So what is that? That's $37, right? $36. Okay. What is $36 going to do for me? Nothing. Okay, so if you want to feel good about your having made money from writing, you need to be really broad about what you count as writing income. All right, you need to be really generous about it. All right, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. All right. Okay, the second thing is gaining fluency and comfort with talking about money is a thing a lot of writers don't want to do and a lot of creatives don't want to do, okay? But we have to do it. We have to gain fluency and a lot of sensitivity around this, all right? We can be comfortable about talking about money, all right? Nobody is above needing to pay the rent or eating or, I was going to say heating, but I live in Southern California, so that's ridiculous. Or, feeding the dog, whatever, all right? So this is a thing that we really need to think about, okay? Okay, so what does this have to do with what we're talking about today? I do have 2 pretty steady teaching gigs, but the bulk of the money I earned from writing and teaching last year came from an incredibly small set of 2 or 3 ideas, all right? And this is how I did it, okay? So this is what today's presentation is mostly about, like how I took these 2 or 3 ideas and I ballooned them into the bulk of this writing income, okay? Sorry, that's over here. Over here. Okay, here we go. Okay, so here are the 2 or 3 ideas. They were growth mindset, which is the concept that none of us is ever an expert at anything. Okay, we're constantly learning. They were also, the other idea was living in a trilingual family. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time. My parents and I communicate in 2 mutual languages, English and Taiwanese, but they speak a 3rd language as Mandarin, and I don't have a lot of access to that. So I've been thinking about this relationship a lot. And then the last idea that I generated a lot of income from was the outdoors and myself, i.e. my relationship to the great outdoors and diversity and equity and inclusion. Okay, so these are the 3 things that I worked on. Okay, so let's see how I worked with that. All right, so as I've been thinking about the way that I generate these ideas, I realize that I break down the 3 ways that I look at my ideas into 3 different buckets. All right, the first is the meta view, which is when I look at an idea, I zoom all the way out, okay? And then I think about this idea in the broadest strokes, right? What does this idea actually mean if I'm looking at it from a bird's eye perspective, okay? And then I think about it from a micro view. I look at the components that make up each individual idea, okay? And then I think about how I can spread out those components into different ideas, all right? And then the last way I look at it is what I call the whole cloth perspective, which is basically I think about a piece of cloth and I think about the idea being a piece of cloth that's completely unmarked. Okay. And I think to myself, what can I make out of this? All right. Can I make a skirt out of it? Can I make a shirt out of it? Can I make an additional pocket out of it? Can I make a scarf out of it? Right. This leads back to the Twyla Sarp thing, right? What can we do with this one little item? Right. What form can one idea take? Okay, so these are the questions I ask myself when I think about making something totally unique out of an idea that may have been knocking around my brain for some time. Okay, and by the way, I said earlier about the chart that these are the ideas that comprise my writing life, and you can see right there the bias that I'm working with. Right, I tend to think of creativity as being just the writing part of my life, but really creativity is also the teaching part of my life. Right, so as I'm looking at these ideas that I've given you, DEI and living in a trilingual family and growth mindset, these things are actually they actually make up the whole of my creative life, and that includes the teaching and the writing part of it. Okay, so again, be generous about the way you define creativity. Okay, so we're gonna put this into practice. Don't worry. This is gonna be it's one of these things where like it sounds goofy and kind of frustrating until you actually put it into practice. So we're gonna do that together today. Okay. So this is Huckleberry. All right. And if I'm going to use Huckleberry as this as an idea, say, I'm going to ask myself, what can I do with Huckleberry in my creative life? Okay. All right. So if I think about it from a macro view, right? Maybe the idea is, what is dog ownership about? Okay. Is it about the fact that I wanted a low stakes dependent, right? Jim and I don't have children, so maybe I wanted to see what it was like to, to be parents like. Okay. Is it about maybe a woman's right to have someone be joyful and happy every time she walks through the door? Like that's a pretty big meta idea, right? What can I do with that, if anything? What about the micro view? Okay, so the micro view might be something like what components make up dog ownership, right? It might be a little essay on puppy training, right? It might be a service piece on what foods to feed a picky dog, okay? Or it could be a funny essay on how my dog and my husband are becoming closer in personality, right? Only it's the husband becoming the dog. People say that dogs like take on the personalities of their owners. I think it's the other way around. I think Jim is actually becoming more like Huckleberry. Okay, so it could be any one of those things, right? But I'm curious to hear from you. Like if y'all own pets, let's try this together right now. Think about it from a macro view. Okay, like what is pet ownership about? Like what are the things that we can think about, right? What can we consider when it comes to looking at pet ownership from a macro point of view? Does anybody want to try this with me? Think about what it's like to noodle these ideas. What would be a macro point of view when it comes to things like owning a dog? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, John.
It changes your perspective of walking.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, it changes your perspective on walking. Good, terrific. All right, anybody else? Bird's eye view. Am I gonna have to make you guys do more Twilight Thought exercises? Maybe. That's okay. That's all right. That's all right. No big deal.
I don't know if this is macro or not,
Okay.
but it changes your sense of responsibility.
That's great. It's totally macro. That's a big idea. But Wayne, you bring up a really good point, because all of these things that I'm doing, that I'm talking about here, these are things that came out of my brain. Okay. My brain is a unique creature. Your brain is a unique creature. All right. So whatever you think about, if they don't fall into one bucket or another, you can make up your own buckets. It doesn't have to be like, oh, well, Ishan told me it's a macro thing, and then she told me it's a micro thing, but it doesn't feel macro to me. That's okay. It's fine. Everybody's brain is unique. All right. So think up your own categories. The whole point of this is to get you kind of thinking in these different directions. Okay. That's terrific, Wayne. Yeah, responsibility. Absolutely. That's a very, very big deal. Terrific.
Accountability.
Okay. Yeah, accountability. That's a good one too. Terrific. What does that look like, right? What does it mean? Okay. And how about a micro view? Any thoughts on what a micro view might be like? What topics might we look at for pet ownership, or for this particular face? Maybe. That's pretty micro. It's pretty specific.
Giving it love.
Yeah. Okay. Giving me love. Right. Okay. Terrific. What love goes into pet ownership relationship, right? Okay. Terrific. All right. Anybody else?
Loss of a dog?
Yeah, loss of a dog. That's a really big one. What specifically about loss of a dog do you think?
Uh, Grief could be one thing, but also when is the right time to bring another one in?
Great. That's terrific. Okay, so what have we just done there? For, when Kristen came up with it, what did she actually do? We actually asked her to dial down a little bit deeper, right? This is the thing with something like a micro view, or really any idea that you have, whether it's meta, micro, or whole cloth. It's really important for us to dial down to specifics. Okay. Sometimes it's not enough to say something like, oh, responsibility or accountability, because that's interesting, and our brains can noodle with it for a little bit, but it may not allow us to formulate something specific out of it, right? But if we delve down into it and we keep on excavating, keep on scratching at that idea, we might find something that actually works for us in terms of being a project. Okay, good. All right, that's great, guys. Thank you so much for playing with me. So I've chosen an illustration for the whole cloth perspective, and I will show you it now. Whole cloth, if you remember, is the idea of what can I do with this idea? Like what can I make out of it that might be totally, completely out of the, out of the ballpark. Okay. All right. And here's what I did. Okay. So Huckleberry is a relatively personable dog. Okay. Some people say he's handsome. My mom calls him cute ugly, which actually is a thing in Taiwanese, which is kind of funny. It's like a whole category of people. It's like, oh yeah, that person's cute ugly. Like that's actually a thing that people say. All right, it's really strange. So for the whole cloth perspective, what I thought about is how do we put him to work fundraising? Okay, as I mentioned to you, I have a few passion projects. I volunteer for a disaster relief agency, so we came up with this really strange fundraiser that was called Hang a Hat on Huckleberry. Okay, and you could write into me with themes, and I would dress him up in some way, shape, or form. Okay, and this particular theme is did I leave the oven on? All right, and we came up with these, like, people wrote in with all these random things, and we dressed them up in that in different costumes, raised a ton of money. It was buckets of fun. But this is an example of how to be creative with something that you might think only exists in this sphere, but actually can go into lots of different spheres. Okay, all right. Now, did this make me a well-known expert in pet husbandry? Probably not. But what it did was it made me feel creative, right? Number one. Number two, it raised a good amount of money for an organization I care about. Number three, it did kind of make people feel like I was super creative, and that made me feel good. Okay, so that's a really good thing, right? I mean, it's one of the ways to look at creativity. All right, it's one of the ways that we have to think about it. Okay, all right. So whole cloth. All right, so that's the whole cloth perspective. Okay. So we're going to try this again. I just want to give you another couple examples here. This is an old idea, but it's still a good example because I got a lot of longevity out of it. In 2017, I visited Manzanar, which is a World War II Japanese concentration camp, and I went there twice. I went there once in the depths of winter in February, and then I went there in the depths of summer in July. I have a peculiar obsession with the desert. We got married in Death Valley. For some reason, Death Valley is only an hour and a half from Manzanar, okay? And you actually drive past it from where we live. If you go the right way, you have to drive past it in order to get to the turnoff that leads to Death Valley. And I had never stopped by before, which I thought was kind of it felt like a sort of an odd dereliction of duty, So in any case, on one of the anniversary trips that we took to go out there, I was seized with a sort of weird sense of responsibility to go and actually see the place. So here's how I turned it into a couple of status boosting projects as well as income boosting projects. Okay. All right. So for the meta view, zooming like way out, visiting Manzanar was a reminder of what public lands mean to people who are immigrants. All right. And it's worth noticing that Birthright, the title, came from a conversation that I had with a close friend when I first moved back to California from New York. And the conversation was about how grateful I was to have a national forest nearby. And Peter's a white American, said, "Oh, I always thought of public lands as my birthright." And that line eventually made it into this essay, but I carried around that conversation in my brain pan for 3 years. Okay. So it's super important to realize that even though these things may happen and you don't do anything with them right away, the things that matter will rattle around in your craw, okay? And they may well provide the crystallization that you need. The reason I've given you this screenshot is because this essay ended up winning second place in a contest that's run by parksandpoints.com. And it's also worthwhile to note that, essay was published in 2018, I want to say. This year is 2021. Earlier this year, I had a book released in 2020. The editors of Parks and Points had me on as a featured reader in their reading series. Okay, so this is an example of like the way that knock-on effect works, right? The minute you have planted a stake someplace, that will allow you to continue to gain influence and continue to exercise influence but with one particular demographic or another. Okay, so again, adding to your store of influence and adding to your sphere of experience. Okay. So yeah, so that's the meta view. Really, what are the big ideas here? Well, what do public lands mean to immigrants? Okay, that was kind of a big deal for me. All right. The micro view was really about me drilling down and figuring out what parts this idea of Manzanar comprised for me. All right. For me, one portion I wanted to look at was love. All right, and the specific love that my husband, who is also white, okay, as I like to say, he's so white, he's from Wisconsin, but that's really not fair because I've just been reading about the Native Americans who live up there and how much influence they've been able to exert over the land there, which is a really empowering story. In any case, so Jim can't usually understand what it's like for somebody like me to visit Manzanar, and I had to really, I don't know, this is really silly because I didn't have to work this hard, but for me, I felt like I was having to work really hard to get him to understand why this place was important to me. Okay. I don't have Japanese heritage in my family, but both sets of grandparents were educated in Japan, and so there is a tie, to that area, and obviously to that ethnicity, because we get mistaken a lot for each other. So what I did was to excavate this idea of love and scratch at it a little bit more, and try to turn it into an opportunity to examine how my husband used the trip to Manzanar to learn more about me, right? And what it was like for us to do that together. And then I turned that into an essay for Bustle, okay? Which, once I'd cracked Bustle, allowed me to continue to pitch to them on a regular basis. Okay, so hang on to those contacts, continue to work them, be brave about pitching. This is one of those things that, that is another lesson that we can use on a regular basis, okay? Okay, so the whole cloth experiment. All right, so I'm not going to try and illustrate or graph this out for you, but you've already seen a little bit how complicated it can be, right? We've talked about the knock-on effect, and we've talked about the ways that these different things spin out into different ideas. But when I think about visiting Manzanar, I also think about it in terms of the panels that I want to be on, right? I think about the books that I eventually want to write. My experience there has had a lot of legs for me. I've used it in one-off classes, in panels, and I am working on a book eventually that is tied to my diversity, equity, inclusion work. I've used the Manzanar experience anecdotally in columns for the writer. And again, there too, I want to remind you that a piece of cloth can become anything, right? This is the way that I look at every idea that I have. For instance, if you are working in the children's writing world, right, you could very well think about doing maybe a guide to national historic sites for children, right? If I'm thinking about panels, I might think about which people are working on panels or pitching panels about writing the other, right? Maybe I would consider pitching this to a session, to an MFA class as a drop-in visit, right? Okay, so there are lots of different ways that we can spin this thing. I'll give you an example. My friend Robert Kerbeck has just published a book about the Woolsey fire in Malibu, California. And actually, this isn't just now. This is, again, what is time? This is like 2 or 3 years ago now. But he actually was asked to appear on a podcast about conspiracy theorists. Nobody knows how that came together, right? But there is this idea that the Malibu fire was started by conspiracy theorists, started by conspiracy, right? So you never know where these context can come from, right? My friend Isabel is the author of a series of humorous novels about a small town orchestra, and a cello museum reached out to her to talk to them about what it was like to be a cellist and want to write about musicality in a humorous sense. Okay, so yeah, it's one of those things where you just have to be really broad and really generous about the way that you think, and see where you go from here. Okay, I want to make a note. We are going to talk about how to collect and organize these ideas later on, so please don't be worried about this idea that you might have too many ideas floating around and you might end up with post-it notes and everything everywhere. It is a genuine fear of mine, and I think I figured out how to fix it, and I will share it with you. Okay. All right. Okay. So here's another example. This is the trilingual family example, right? I parlayed that into an essay, right, about learning a new language as an adult, right? This is just a super broad view. It was a very broad essay. A note about this. there are certain venues that require you to write in certain styles. Shondaland, which is the online home of the television producer and writer Shonda Rhimes. She did Scandal. She did Grey's Anatomy. Okay, so like super big, television producer. She has this online home. The thing about Shondaland is that it's a very woman power, pat yourself on the back type venue. Okay. And so I had to kind of adjust my particular way of writing to suit that. All right. And that's okay. That's a thing that you have to learn how to do, right? If you want to be in a certain venue, then you have to learn how to adjust your expectations and you have to learn how to adjust your writing style to suit that. Okay. So it's completely fine. I don't know that I'll write for them again because I'm not really great at writing pat yourself on the back stories. But it's a thing that, a skill that you want to pick it up. Okay. So yeah, this is the meta view. All right. For the micro view, I drilled down into the parts that this idea comprised again, right? So for me, this idea of a trilingual family was also about the idea of what it looks like when I merge the idea of my trilingual family with watching a bilingual movie. All right. So there's a little bit of cultural criticism here, but it's also about the very specific conjuncture of my understanding of what my trilingual family meant to me. Okay. So this is one of those very specific, drilling down things. Right. Okay. And then this is the $45 essay from Brevity, by the way, just FYI. So when I looked at it in the whole cloth view, I really picked it apart and I wondered, could I make this very cut and dry experience, i.e., this very practical thing of learning a third language? Could I figure out a way to speak about it lyrically, right? And the answer is yes, I could, right? The idea is that, I wanted to do something really tight. I wanted to specifically have it be around my father reading a poem to me, right? And so for me, this is the whole cloth representation of what that idea looks like, okay? All right. Okay. So here's the other things that I was able to make this into. Again, this is whole cloth part 2, right? I've now done 3 or 4 lectures on what it means to read window works versus mirror works. That is, works that allow you to see into somebody else's life as opposed to works that allow you to just look at, a representation of yourself, right? I've done that's a typo. I'm sorry. It should not be "and" book critique. Obviously, it should be "a" book critique for Electric Lit earlier this year. And I also have dedicated a portion of a diversity, equity, and inclusion workshop for a major national retailer based around the fact that I live in a trilingual family and what that means to people who might be working with me. Okay. So again, lots of different ways to look at this. I encourage you to be broad about your ideas and keep on thinking about it. Okay. Now, one thing that I'd like for you to notice about this is how long the comet tail this thing is. All right. I've been learning Mandarin, right, i.e. trying to tap into this third language since late 2018 off and on. Okay. So this is the idea that keeps on giving, right? And frankly, all of your ideas can also be like this as well. All right. So just remember, just because you've written something down, it doesn't mean that there isn't an iteration of it that can be told over and over and over again. All right. Now, with that said, and we'll get to this a little bit later on, with that said, there are some anecdotes that you tell over and over and over again. And then finally, you realize you don't need to tell those anecdotes over and over again. And that's fine, okay? In my memoir, Pinups, there are a couple of anecdotes that I have been telling off and on since 1999. Literally, no lie, okay? And you know what? I don't feel the need to tell those stories anymore. Okay. The book it's a short book. It's 66 pages long, but you know what? Once I put those down, it was a very cathartic experience for me to write that essay, about my life as an outdoors woman living in a white environment, in a very white, recreational field. Okay. And it made me feel like I had done with those, and so believe it or not, I've actually forgotten a lot about those anecdotes. Like they just gone out of my head, and that's completely okay. It's great. It just tells me that I'm done with those and I don't need to revisit them anymore. Okay. All right. Okay. Okay. Do we have any questions? No? Okay. All right, great. Again, if you all do have questions, John's monitoring the chat, so I'm very happy to take them on as you see fit. Okay. Okay. All right, here's more of this stuff, right? There's so many possibilities here, right? I haven't even tapped into a lot of these. And the thing I want you to notice here is that each one of these ideas could have a different audience. right? It could touch a totally different sector of society, okay? I could write about food, right? And I don't write about food very often, okay? So that could actually be a really good audience for me to tap into. I do some work around pedagogy, but I don't do a whole lot of expertise level work around pedagogy. But this is it does weigh into the way that I teach, right? And so it could be something that I find myself expanding on in terms of expertise there, right? Okay, so think about the outlets that might be interested in any one of these angles, right? And apply that same thinking to the ideas that you're having, okay? Alrighty. Let's see here. We are going to take a break, by the way, folks. Don't worry. Okay. Okay. One last example. I'm also interested in implicit bias, equity, and representation issues. All right. So the question I always ask myself is, how do I take this idea and spin it into different modes of income or visibility? Right. I did an exhibit for the Nixon Presidential Library on women's employment. All right. During that specific during Nixon's presidential tenure, that was a really cool experience. It allowed me to gain a lot more credentials around this area. From that, I actually spun that into a talk at the Susan B. Anthony House in Rochester, right? So I was able to go there in COVID times, right, via the magic of Zoom, and talk to a whole new audience, right, who then bought more copies of my book, okay? I, of course, wrote Pinup, right, and then I do a lot of theme book events around it, right? I'm now consulting for one of the universities on diversity and inclusion, and I did a panel on publishing and accessibility that was really valuable to me, and that, again, opened up my expertise to a whole new audience, okay? So yeah, good things. All right. Okay. So we've talked about the way that I see each ideal, but then I also realized that there's also another way that explains how I look at ideas pretty well. Again, just nodding to the fact that everybody's brain is unique. So I'm going to give you another way of looking at it. And once again, I borrowed this from Twyla Tharp, who, by the way, also can only ever do anything if she's feeling warm, okay, which I think is interesting because she lives in New York City, and so she's like, I mean, there are seasons there, right? But yeah, she has to have the heat turned up, she's got to be limbered up and warmed up, so this is one of those things too that I think about, because I think the way that you feel physically has a lot to do with the way that you feel mentally up here, right? Okay, so if you're having a hard time coming up with ideas, you should always ask yourself, am I thirsty? Am I hungry? Did I get enough sleep? Have I pooped today? Did I have my vitamins? Am I missing my friends, right? Okay, because these basic things that our bodies are trying to tell us may not be so obvious when you're just sat there locked at your desk being like, oh my God, I have to come up with these ideas. Okay, that's no fun. It's not fun if you're not fed and watered, right? Okay, all right, just things to think about. Okay, so Twyla Tharp. She looks at it as reading fat, okay, and what she means is don't silo your information or intake or your thinking. All right. So if you're reading something like for work, okay, or for the book that you're working on, right, or for the essay that you're working on, you should ask yourself how that book or how that material or whatever thing you're watching might be applicable to other areas in your life. All right. So what does that mean? Okay. So I am currently watching a show called Grantchester, which is set in the 1950s. And it is about a vicar who goes around solving crimes. Okay. I love it. It's wonderful. All right. But I recently noticed that one of the secretaries in the police department, the actor is a thalidomide baby. So her wrist kind of ends like right here, where her hand is. Okay. And I was thinking about that and I was like, that's really interesting. Why don't we see more representations of disabled folks in 1950s stage television, right? Like, why is that? Okay. And also, the thing that's great about this particular representation is that her disability isn't a part of the storyline. It's not like, oh my gosh, we have this woman, she's disabled. What do we do with her? Can she do her job, right? It's not about that at all, okay? It's about the fact that she's just there, because guess what? Disability is the most intersectional of all of the demographic markers, all right? So as I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking to myself, okay, what can I do with this that maybe an essay later on, right, that will allow me to bolster my work in accessibility for people, okay? What can I do with this that will allow me to write more about the way that I as a consumer can influence television trends, okay, or creative trends, all right? So don't lock yourself in to any one mindset, all right? Just keep yourself super, super broad, okay? Related to that, you're never too literary for anything, all right? People who make a living from ideas and writing are flexible, okay? And the ones that are most flexible can write to any magazine style or medium, all right? So don't feel like your work is too literary or that nobody will understand you or that that it's blah, blah, whatever. Okay. Like if you're going to make a living at this thing, you do need to be somewhat flexible. I'm not saying you have to do that. All right. But I am saying that if you want to do the thing where you're generating a lot of work and you're seeing it get published a lot, then being flexible is a right way to do it. Okay. This goes back to what I was talking about at Shondaland earlier, right? Where the magazine had a specific style and I needed to meet that. Did it take work? Yeah. Was I miserable? Yes. And the worst part about it is that I was like traveling to a conference where I was, being touted as an expert and, blah, blah, blah. So my ego really got in the way, right? Of like, and I was really angry. I was like, oh my God, who does this editor think she is? Blah, 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 so on and so forth. But I got over it, right? So your ego is going to be your biggest barrier to being flexible around these things. All right. Okay. So just think about it. Okay. Okay. Step 2. Remember we talked about increasing your sphere of influence, right? It's important to note that if you look up the word resources, it'll give you nearly the exact same definition as experts, okay? They're the same, all right? If folks would call you a resource in something, the dictionary would also refer to you as an expert, okay? Obviously, call yourself what you're comfortable with, but know that when people ask for subject matter experts, right, as they sometimes do, okay, they're looking for people with some experience in whatever subject it is, all right? So in the academic world, we look for people who are published, right? That's why they keep on asking you to publish, right? And keep on making sure that you're in peer reviews and so on and so forth, right? But publication is no longer the only barometer of success, right? There are things like appearing on panels. There are things like creating a piece of art around it. Okay, there are things like doing a lot of study in it, right? There are things like just being a good observer, right? Can make you a really good resource in lots of different things. Okay, when I lived in New York, my friends used to joke that like I was an expert in, hip restaurants to go to, right? And really that was only because I did a lot of reading around that venue, because it was that area, because it was part of my job, right? And when I was in advertising sales, it was my job to take people out to restaurants so they could wine and dine them, right? And that made me the de facto expo. Okay. So just be generous, about the way that you're looking at yourself. All right. So this is being a subject matter expert is a great way to generate more income. It's a terrific way to boost your expertise level and your profile in this particular world. All right. Okay. Step 3, asking for help and introductions. All right. So I'm very big on what people refer to as networking with kind of like a distasteful moo. People are really worried about the idea of networking as if it's an icky thing to do. It's not an icky thing to do. Really what it means is making friends with other writers. It's really not that hard. Okay. There is guaranteed to be somebody out there who has either written about something similar to what you're working on, right? Or who has a connection to a place that might be willing to host your idea or, your brilliant panel or something. Okay. So ask around, right? Be really smart about leveraging your connections. We're going to get to how to be smart in a second here. The whole point of this is it might feel weird to you to start thinking about who it is that can help you to, get an essay placed someplace or to, mount a panel someplace or something like that. But you should do it. Okay. It's a really, really, really smart idea for you to start thinking about exercising your creativity on and off the page. All right. Okay. So here's how we ask for introductions. All right. First, get to know your expert or your resource. All right. In other words, don't do the thing where you're like, hey, I heard you're interested in, or I heard you have a connection to this place, right? Can I pick your brain? All right. Like that's not the right way to do it. Okay. Get to know the person that you're approaching, right? Find out, what work they've done. Do some research around the publications that they have. Think about the areas that they work in. In other words, act knowledgeable. Okay, or be knowledgeable. Do you know how to act knowledgeable? Just be knowledgeable, right? Okay. The second way to do it is the second step is to come with a set of questions based on what you know about your resource, right? Know what your intention is when you approach this person. Try to find out, try to be clear about what it is that you want to get out of this relationship. don't ask questions that you can easily Google the answer to, right? Either one of the ones that I always get all the time is like, what's the difference between self-publishing and traditional publishing? Like that's not a question I want to answer for you. It's a waste of my time. It's a waste of your time. Also, Google will do it for free, so don't be that person, okay? And then finally, say thank you, right? Okay, so these all seem super obvious, right? But they don't always take place. I would recommend you write these down someplace. This is a really good cheat sheet to doing this sort of thing and to just like making sure that you check off those boxes. Every single one of these should always take place when you're picking somebody else's brain, all right? It is critical, all right? It's really important to do these things. Okay. All right. Okay. So here are some side benefits to thinking fat, right? You get an increased breadth of community, i.e., the people that you know, right, can suddenly become. That feels like a larger, broad swath of society, right? That's a really good thing. Okay. You also get increased visibility in terms of people understanding what you're good at or what you're interested in. Okay. That's related to increased platform, right? Which is this thing that so many people bark on about, right? What it means is what people think you're good at. That's it. Okay. What people know you for, right? I often cannot shut up about being in the outdoors and how important equity is in that field, right? Okay. Therefore, I become a person that people go to for that type of expertise. All right. And then lastly, it grants you a lot more confidence. All right. I think this is another thing alongside money and income that people don't like to talk about. The writer's ego is a delicate thing, right? Some days we're like, everybody wants to see my work. I just know it. So I'm going to sit down and bang out this incredibly literary work that, like, 3 people at Brevity Magazine are going to see. Okay. And then other days we're like, nobody wants to see my work. I'm going to walk around with a paper bag over my head and just, hyperventilate because nobody loves me. All right. Like, this is a very real thing. Okay. So any scrap of new confidence that you can gain is really, really worthwhile. All right. Do not underestimate the value of any additional degree of confidence that you can gain. All right. And that confidence, if it can come from, just sort of carving out your own little niche in the expert world is a really good thing. Okay. All right. Okay. One final word about thinking fat. All right. Okay. So there's 2 things here. All right. This is a quote from a wonderful writer named Kenji Yoshino. All right. When I asked PowerPoint to come up with a design idea for this slide, it came up with this horrible graphic of this piece of sushi. Do you see this? Why? Why? It came up with this because Kenji Yoshino is a Japanese name. It's like, okay, well, I've left it here because I needed somebody else to see it to like just so I was aware that I was not going absolutely batshit bananas. Okay. But it's also too good of an opportunity to show you, to actually demonstrate in real life what is commonly referred to as a microaggression. Okay, this is a Japanese name, and it is immediately associated with sushi. No, not okay. And in fact, I actually scrolled down through many pages of these design ideas to see if it would come up with anything other than sushi, and it didn't. It always showed me this annoying piece of sushi. All right, so put it in your pockets. Think about it later on. This presentation has nothing to do with that. Let's turn our attention now to this particular quote. We all have a story we must repeat until we get it right. A story whose conveniences must be corrected and whose implications must be seen through before we are done with it or it with us. Okay. And this is the thing that I was referring to with regards to pinups, right? Where it's like, I had told versions of that story enough that, or those anecdotes enough that when I finally felt like I had found the right format for them and finally found the right home for them, they went away. All right. But these iterations that I keep on telling you about, right? The meta view, the micro view, the whole cloth view. This might well be a sign that you are trying to tell a story that you must repeat until you get it right. Okay, you're telling a story whose conveniences must be corrected and whose implications must be seen through before you're done with it or with the story, or the story is done with you. Okay, so think about it that way. Think about these iterations that we're noodling around in terms of these stories that we have to get right, the stories that we cannot stop telling over and over again until we actually get it right. Whether when something feels unweighted within us or when the scales are balanced within us. Okay, all right, cool. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys a break. Yay, breaks are good, right? Okay, so this is a 20-minute break, and you do have homework, all right? And we're going to discuss this when we get back, all right? I want you to take an idea that's burning a hole in your brain, and then I would like you to think up 3 or more ways to spin it, okay? One of these ideas should be meta, obviously. Okay, one should be micro, and the other should be whole cloth. All right. Before we go, does anybody want to just verbalize their ideas? Sometimes I find that kind of thing helps with these exercises. Any thoughts? Okay.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I'm thinking about just education and how it's been obsessed with me and how difficult it's become because of the pandemic on all these different levels.
Okay. Good. Good. Um, okay. What specifically about that? Because there's been a lot written about it.
Yeah, I'm thinking this has been my hardest semester of teaching ever.
Okay.
And it was supposed to be as we came back to a normal, basically.
Right.
But of course, it's not that. It's different, and now it's everything is both hybrid and in person, and everything has to be perfect all the time
Good.
to meet the needs of people who don't understand what's happening to them. Like none of us know what's happening.
Yeah. Okay, good. All right, great. Okay, so if we need to dial that down to one sentence in terms of like a one sentence idea, what do you think that would look like? Would it be something around the juxtaposition of, exactly what you're saying, right? The weirdness of the fact that this is supposed to be getting easier, right? In some way, shape, or form. We've been doing it for a year and a half now, right? Or tell me more.
Yeah, it's come really clear because I'm the adjunct coordinator, which means basically I'm observing and the boss of the adjuncts. And so maybe as adjunct coordinator, I've been watching people suffer as they try to adjust to this new normal.
Good. Okay, great. That's terrific. That's terrific. Good. Thanks for sharing that with us. I look forward to seeing your ideas. Okay, anybody else want to articulate any brain farts they're having? And if you want to keep it yourself, that's totally cool too. Okay, great. All right, I don't see any hands. So I'm going to let you guys. Oh, yep, Wayne.
Yeah, I'll try it.
Sure.
I'm thinking about vision,
Uh-huh.
and specifically how eyesight shapes one's reality. And I don't know where this fits, but we see a world of solid objects, but science tells us that in fact, those solid objects are made up of a myriad of moving molecules, etc., that in fact we see a solid world, but it isn't.
Mm.
And sometimes when I think about that, almost start seeing it the way it really is, which is not what I'd prefer to do. But and I'm not sure where that fits
Okay.
on the spectrum. I think vision is what you're talking about as the
Yeah.
central idea, and then this is one way to go with it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. I think that's terrific. And the social implications of vision too are huge, right? Our society is so sight-based, especially now, right? In tandem with what John is saying about how everything's online now, and so this idea of virtual reality has become ever more present in our lives, right? So yeah, it has a lot of timeliness to it. Good. Okay. Terrific. Great. Okay, mates, I'm gonna let you go. Come back to me at 2:22. All right. And I will see you all in a little bit. Turn off your cameras, walk away, get up, do some exercises. Twyla Tharp. Okay, see you later. Okay, everybody, we'll give everybody one more minute to get back here when the clock hits 22. And we'll chat about your ideas, and then we're going to go right into how to organize all these brilliant ideas you're having, okay? Okay, how was your break? Yeah, all right. Did we come up with any ideas that we want to share with anybody? Anybody want to give this a go?
Well, I have a couple of broad ideas.
Okay, good.
I'm interested in video poetry and
Oh.
particularly video haiku.
Mhm.
And I think there's different things, but there's other folks already doing this. So, but it's kind of my passion thing too.
Oh, good. Okay, terrific. All right, so you're interested in video haiku. But with that said, I can also see lots of things happening around guiding people into how to do it for themselves, right? So you could be a resource in that direction, right? Alongside of just creating it, right, which is no mean feat. You could be the one who helps people to get into it, right? So that's one way to look at it, right? That would be a whole cloth kind of way of looking at it. But in terms of the actual idea itself, I think I would encourage you to dial down a little bit more specifically into the subject matters that interest you, right? In terms of the actual haikus themselves, right? So if we're looking at the at the micro idea, right, then I would encourage you to really drill down into the different styles and different types of haiku that you might come across, the different traditions you might follow, or the different subject matter, right? And in terms of the macro idea, I think I would look at something along the lines of looking at how video can transform the way that we experience poetry, right? That kind of thing. Okay, does that make sense?
Oh yeah, thank
Cool.
you.
Good. Yeah, sure. Okay. Anybody else want to share? Did we come up with anything over the break that we want to just float past people? John?
Yeah, I've got a couple of micro and lots of the macro.
Yeah, good.
But I was thinking about an experience I'm having with a student who is she's soft-spoken and she's introverted, and she has a mask, and I'm hard of hearing, and like she has a lot of great things to say, but this interaction becomes very difficult because of that.
Good. Yeah.
Just I think like a quick brevity type kind of essay.
Yeah, that's terrific. I mean, really focusing on that specific experience, and just kind of making it work for you in terms of making sure that it expresses, the entirety of how you're feeling about that whole situation, right? Good. Okay, terrific. And then what did you come up with in terms of the meta view?
I got several. One is the idea of depersonalization and how do we then do repersonalization, both in terms of the staff and the students, because like the adjunct staff have no connection right now to Mount Tech.
Wow. Okay.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
They're teaching for them, but they don't, aside from a few intervals.
Yeah.
Loss of job openings because of
Okay. Yep.
that, and,
Good.
what's going on in the industry. Let's see. And just, I mean, this sounds really cheap, but the importance of kindness. I think there could a lot be said about that.
Okay. What makes you say that feels cheap?
I don't know, just not cheap, like cliched, already done, that kind of thing.
Okay. And how many of these ideas that are floating around there right now are stories that have already been done?
I don't know.
All of them. All of them, right? I mean, it's fine. Like lean it. I think John has specific knowledge about my allergy to earnestness. Like, I mean, I have a real problem with it, right? But as I've gotten older, I've become to realize that you can embrace it, and really, really lean into it. It's okay. It's okay. It's a great thing. Really quick story about earnestness. I'm under contract with Medium right now, where every month they pay me a certain amount of money, and I get to do whatever I want to on that particular platform. Okay. So the thing that's stuck in my craw lately is this post I did on making paint blobs into birds, where you just like blob thing on a piece of paper and then you add a beak and some legs and wings and it's like suddenly a bird, right? And they loved it. They were like, oh, it's great. They promoted it everywhere. It was terrific. And I've been feeling really guilty about the earnestness of this thing, right? It's just paint blobs, right? But I was at a restaurant the other day and the waitress was wondering what I was doing and I'm like, oh, any blob can be a bird. And she was really excited about that. So I just made some blob birds and I gave them to her. And it made her so happy and it basically set up my day. Do you know what I mean? Like I felt so much more creative over the course of that day, you know? And so when you think about things that are maybe too earnest or that are maybe too cliche, remember that your spin on it is what is going to take it out of the cliche sphere, right? Okay. So yes, a lot's been written about kindness, but you know, there have been a lot of paint blobs that have been made out there too, right? So it's okay. I think that's great. I think that's great. Okay. All right, we're gonna move on. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about idea organization. All right. If you're anything like me, you have so many ideas, okay, and they're everywhere. All right, and you have had historically a terrible time of storing them, right? And you end up doing this thing where it's like, I want to write about this and I want to do that and I want to think about this and I want to think that. And then you can't, you not only can you not organize them, you can't find the research that is floating around that idea, okay? And you have to go searching through the books that you've paginated or not paginated, searching through the books that you've flagged, and you have to go like wondering, you know, where you saw that idea or where you watched that television show or where you got this particular quote. And it can become very, very frustrating, okay? The thing about ideas is this. Discrete ideas by themselves are useless, okay? Ideas are no good unless they're having sex with each other. All right, what do I mean by that? Okay, what I mean is that ideas work best when they live in an ecosystem, okay? When they can interact with each other, when they can bounce off of each other. This is why, you know, decisions made by committee, although they can be frustrating, are also very, very good things, right? If you get a diverse enough group, you know, you can get lots of people bouncing each other's ideas off each other, right? That's a really good thing, okay? So what I've done in the last few years is to really kind of take a deep dive into how I organize my note-taking and my research in order to be able to access that research and that note-taking at any given time, all right? And I've stumbled across a system, not stumbled, I mean, I've specifically researched the system called Zettelkasten, all right? Basically, this is a system that is adjacent to, but not necessarily directly tied to the exercise we just did, all right? The whole point is that when you have come up with all these micro ideas and these meta ideas and the whole cloth idea, you will inevitably struggle to organize all the different thoughts and resources that you gather around them, okay? Zettelkasten is an idea ecosystem, all right? It's a home for all of the flotsam and the dust motes and all that stuff that inevitably comes from the fertility of your brain, okay? And no, I am not being ironic when I use that verbiage. Your brain is fertile, okay? Things will spring forth, okay? Probably not fully formed, as in Athena from the head of Zeus, all right? But there are going to be ideas that you will want to do something with, and it will frustrate you to no end if it's just sitting there and you can't find it, or it's gathering dust, okay? That's a terrible thing, right? Okay, so the whole point of this is to make sure that you put those idea sets in place and that the supporting resources that you find to help you to grow those ideas, right? To make them fully fleshed essays or panel ideas or television shows, if you like, have some place to go, all right? So yes, your brain is fertile. Ideas will spring forth, especially as you intake, okay? You can't work in a vacuum, right? As you're reading things and as you're interacting with people, you know, you might be taking notes or whichever. The question is, what do you do with those notes and are you being smart about them, okay? All right, so Zettelkasten. Okay. Whoop. What is, oh, it's one of those really cute animated slides. Okay. All right. So this quote is from Wikipedia, by the way. It is Zettelkasten literally means slip box. Okay. Slip is Zettel, Kasten is box. It is a system of note taking and personal knowledge management used in research and study. I drew this quote directly from Wikipedia. It is the most concise wording for a potentially messy thing that I could find. The point is it allows for better idea and resource retrieval. Okay. And that allows for increased creativity, right? David G. Allen, who is the founder of a movement called Getting Things Done, said something like, your brain is not for holding things in, it's for making things up, okay? So you wanna let your brain be creative. Don't make it do things like trying to remember where you found that quote, right? Or where you read that anecdote, okay? Don't do that, you know, put it down someplace so you have it, okay? Okay, so all of my books look like this, all right? Okay, this happens because I'm super excited by what I'm reading, right? And I'm very excited at the idea that I might be able to use this information one day, all right? But what is the best way to actually gather this information and put it someplace, specific, okay? Or maybe you don't do this, right? Maybe you don't actually write these things down. The reason I arrived at this methodology of like, underlining and flagging things in different colors and posting things, is because this was actually the physical representation of what the inside of my brain looked like, and I had to put it somewhere. Okay. What happens is, as we're reading or watching something, you think to yourself, "Oh, this could apply, to this thing over here in my brain, living in sector AB or whatever." Okay. And eventually, your brain reaches critical mass. Okay. It wants to do things with all the connections and the informations, and all these little synapses that are firing together. But if you have no physical representation of it, or digital, by the way, the system also works digitally too. You end up doing something like, okay, oh, I read that anecdote in the part of the book where she's talking about her childhood, so maybe it should be physically early on in the book. And then maybe you might think to yourself, oh, hold on. Okay, so I read that book at the same time I bought those blue jeans at Costco, so maybe it was last week. And then you think to yourself, where did I put those books that I read last week? Is it with the blue jeans that I bought from Costco? Right? Like this is actually a thing that happens in my brain. Okay, that happened in my brain before I found this particular methodology. All right. So the way that my brain was filing things wasn't actually working for me at all. Okay. It was not a good thing. All right. It was just very disorganized. And I spent hours looking for things like, where I had put that phrasing or where I had learned that quote, right? Okay. So it was not a good thing. All right. Okay, so the system goes by different names, right? In its original German, the guy who actually made it famous, he called it the slip box system. This is the Zelda is one of the most popular names around it, and then there is a name for something similar called the note card system, which was popularized by a productivity expert named Ryan Holiday, who he says stole it from his mentor Robert Greene. All right, all of these systems involves some version of notating or flagging or writing down on an index card a quote or an idea that you wanted to remember. Okay, I first encountered it as a note card system, and I really, really wanted to love this version of it. Basically, it involved every time you found something you loved, you would write it down, and then you would write down where you found the quote in, and then you would file it in a subject in a box that related to that subject matter. Okay, so it looked like this. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. Okay. It's rainbow colored. All the boxes are discrete. I'm using this gorgeous labeling system. Okay. The problem is, though, that this is a system for storage. Okay. But what I wanted was a way to use the thoughts that I was having in my brain. All right. This only allowed me to put these quotes or these ideas into different boxes, but it wasn't, as I mentioned before, allowing these ideas to have sex, i.e. they were not generating anything, okay? They were just sitting there in individual boxes, all right? So what I would have to do in terms of my brain was I would have to be like, okay, well, I'm going to write a book, I'm going to write a post about self-improvement, all right? And then I would go to this little box here, this improvement box right here, and I would open it up and I would look through the cards, but I still wouldn't find what I was looking for, because really what had happened was, even though I was writing about improvement, all of the ideas that led to a certain point that I wanted to make lived somewhere in these other boxes, So there was no way of like actually connecting any of these ideas together. Okay, if that makes sense. All right. So basically, what's happening to me is, as I mentioned before, with regards to the television show that I was watching, Grantchester, right? What's happening is, if I'm reading something or I'm watching something, I'm already thinking to myself, how does this connect to this thing that's already happening in my life, right? Or how does it connect to this idea that I've already had? I'm also thinking, how can I use this particular factoid here or there or everywhere, right? Okay, so for instance, if we revisit this picture, okay, this what you see here is literally how I wrote the workbook that I wrote on diversity and inclusion. Okay, so I would read the book and I would flag interesting things. Okay, and then I would go back and look at all the different things that I had flagged or drawn circles around or underlined, and then I notated the ones that I thought would make good exercises. That involved going through the book 2 times, 3 times. It was ridiculous. It is so inefficient. I wasted so much time. And again, there was a whole lot of where did I read that anecdote? Okay, well, it was in the part of her life where she did this, right? And then I would inevitably have to page through until I found that it was, and by the way, the index was completely useless, all right? I did not, my brain didn't work the way of the index, so it didn't work that way, all right? Okay, so it was not useful. Another illustration, I also wrote an entire museum exhibit this way, where I went through and I flagged all of these different sections, okay? These, by the way, these Post-it colors stand for nothing. They stand for nothing. They just happen to be the next Post-its that I pulled. Okay, this was horrifying. This is a 300-page document. It has Post-its all over the place. It was a nightmare. Okay, so you can see how just putting things into buckets might not be useful for somebody like me, right? Even though the box and the organization behind it seemed useful, that system, like I said, was about storage. Okay, so I really need something that would allow these ideas to generate. Okay. Okay, so here's what you need to know about Zettelkasten. It was made famous by Nicholas Lerman. He developed the vision, his version over the years, right? But it also was a version that has been used by various people going all the way back to Copernicus, okay, and Carl Linnaeus, okay? So it has been used by people since the 1500s, all right? He developed it again so that your brain doesn't have to hold stuff in; it just has to come up with ideas, and then it can, germinate with each other. The guy's system was 90,000 cards big by the time it was done, all right? And what does that tell you? It tells you that he had reached a critical mass of ideas, okay, and that they could then attach to each other. And I will tell you how to do this, okay? And then the other thing you need to know is that no matter how much you read about Zettelkasten, you need to know that the system is engineered for his brain, okay? Again, your brain is unique, so you can adapt these as they come fit, all right? Okay, I know this sounds confusing, but here we are, okay? Okay, here's the way that it breaks down, all right? The Zettelkasten system involves two types of cards: the bibliography cards, okay, and then the actual index cards that you write the quotes or ideas down on, okay, and then it involves storage boxes, all right, and then obviously a pen, okay. And again, this is analog, but you can also do this digitally. There's a lot of systems that actually work with this really, really well. Notion is one of them. Roam is another one of them. There's a ton of ideas that you can use, all right, or a ton of different tools, okay. All right, okay, and the components of each slip, okay, are a unique card address, i.e. you assign every card a number, okay, and then you figure out the bibliographic note, which is, oh, where did I get this specific idea from? Which book did I read it in? What television show did I watch it on? Okay. Then the quote or the thing that made you stop and, think about it. And then here's a critical part: an original thought that connects to that. Okay. So when you write down that quote, you should also be taking some time to write down your original thought around it. Okay. So for instance, if I'm looking at a quote that's about what they ate in Antarctica, the original thought that might be attached is something to the effect of, gee, I wonder if I can recreate this today. Would modern audiences be able to eat it, right? Okay, so it might be that kind of thing, but it should be fully fleshed out enough so that you actually have some idea of how it connects to your brain, okay? And then this last one is also critical. This is a linking note. The linking note is how that card connects to every other card in your box, okay? All right, okay, here's how I'm gonna show it to you how, in terms of how it works. Okay. So it might work this way. While you're reading a thing or watching a television show or whatever, all right, you either are going to write down immediately when you find something you like, okay, plus the accompanying original thought, okay, or you flag it with a Post-it note, okay, and then you come back and digest it a week later, all right? If you chose the former, you're okay, but if you chose the latter, you need to make sure that you give yourself enough thought and enough context to understand it later on, okay? So either way, you're going to have something, you're going to have an index card at the end of the day, all right? And this is the way that I do it, right? Okay. You're going to read the thing, and then you're going to flag everything and annotate it. You're going to finish reading the thing, make the bibliography card for your actual like the source, okay? And then you're going to put the original ideas onto a Zettel, all right? And then you're going to file it, okay? Okay, so here's what a Zettel card looks like. Again, the unique identifier, the body or the content that includes the actual quote itself, and then the footer or the references. This section here I use for linking to other cards, okay? All right, here's what it looks like. This is a representation of the cards that I use. The card number, which will always be unique to that specific card, okay? The book reference number, i.e. this relates to the bibliography card, okay? And then down at the bottom, these are the cards it links to, all right? So for instance, going back to Antarctic food, if this is a card about Antarctic food, and I've remembered that I have 3 other cards that relate to Antarctic food that might actually be able to, help me flesh out this idea, then I'll list those cards at the bottom here. All right. And at the end of the day, when I decide that I want to write a post or something that is rotating around Antarctic food, I'll pull all the cards that are related to Antarctic food. Okay. I only have to remember one card, right? Because it's listed up here, and that card will lead me to all these other cards that exist. And I will then have a fully fleshed out essay right there, just in the format of these cards. Okay. Okay. All right. Okay. So there are 2 critical things you need to know, all right? The first thing, and actually we'll do this one first, all right, is that you have to actually have a critical mass of cards before you can actually link to each other, right? Remember we talked about ideas having sex, right? Okay, you can't link one card to itself. It doesn't do anything, all right? You also will have a very hard time if you only have a set of 10 cards and you're trying to link them to each other, all right? That doesn't make any sense either, okay? So for me, I had to get up to like 60 cards or so before they could start actually linking to each other and when the ideas started making sense together, okay? The second thing is that the original numbering system for Zettelkasten was totally bananas, all right? So his system was like numerical at first, 21, 22, 23, okay? Unless there already was a card number 23, in which case he would renumber it 22A, all right? And then at the end of the day, his cards would be like 21/3D7A7. That's not going to work for me, okay? It worked for him, but it's not going to work for me, all right? So I had to come up with my own numbering system, and you will too, okay? All right. Okay, so this last slide here is just like a bunch of resources that I will put in a resource sheet, and I'm going to send it to John later on so you have it. But we're at 3 minutes until the end of the session. I'm sorry this ran a little bit long. This last section was probably super confusing to you, but if it's okay, I would like to open up the floor to questions. Sorry. Do we have a buffer zone, John, by the way, between classes?
Yeah, our next class is at 5 p.m., so we've got a pretty good.
Oh, okay, great. All right, so I'm okay if y'all want to ask questions, or if you are just too tired and everything is explodey, that's okay too. If you want to come back to me later on, that's a really good thing. Oh, Edna, good. I'm so glad that the idea sorter was an eye opener for you. I was reading through the slides and I'm like, oh my God, is this going to make sense to anybody? I'm glad it makes sense to you. Does anybody have any questions about what we've covered today?
You know what I missed? Where do you put the? I'm sure you explained it, but I just kind of missed it.
Yeah.
Where do you put the cards?
Okay, I'm actually gonna go get them. I meant to have them by desk and I forgot. So give me just 1 second. My house is not that big. I'll be right back. Okay. Okay, I don't know about you all, but I love office supplies. So this was really fun for me. And I'm gonna stop share so I can see you all. Hold on. Ah! Oh,
I can
hold
do
on.
that for you.
Yeah, that would be good. Thanks, John. Great. Okay, all right, so this is this box that I found, okay? It's pretty cool. It's pretty blue color, but I've separated them according to tabs. So I keep them in this box, and then these are like quotes from books, a reading, right? And then there are loose ideas, personas, and things that I have to look up, okay? So I file them in this particular box. Then I have a separate box that is specifically for my bibliography cards. This is just a recipe box. These are 4x6 index cards. And each one of these cards has the full bibliographic information of a book on it, okay? And I've assigned it a number, okay? So every single book I read has got an individual number assigned to it, okay? And this might be any documentary I'm watching. They each have individual numbers, okay? So what happens is when I go to write a Zettel, each one of these cards has the individual book number assigned to it, okay? Now, the thing with this is that because I'm a tricolor pen freak, this is working for me, right? But people who are writing in, and I'm also spatially oriented, so I always know that this top right-hand corner is specifically for the bibliographic number and for nothing else, okay? And the top left-hand corner is for the unique identifier, all right? Let me see if I can pull one that has links to it. Let's see. Okay, so here's one where card number 20 is linked directly to card number 19. Okay, and so when I pull this card, I know that I also have to pull card number 19. Okay, so that's where I'm keeping the ideas. It's going to be like like I mentioned, my Zettelkasten system is pretty young yet. I've maybe 75, 80 cards, but yeah, I find myself reaching for the system over and over again. I also have an index where I, just in case, it's another backup system, just in case I completely forget, my brain explodes and I totally forget how I filed everything. I've actually listed what cards correspond to which books, right? So it's just a backup though. You don't necessarily have to do that, okay? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
John's like, yeah, kind of, sort of. You really have to practice it in order for it to make any sense. So, okay. All right, cool. Anybody else? My numbering system. Okay, how do I keep track of the numbers you're already at the bottom of the cards? Do I have to look them up when you want to add them to a new card? Weirdly, I also had this concern. Okay, weirdly, it actually kind of fixes itself. All right, so basically what happens is you're talking about the linking cards, right? The card that links to each other. Okay, so basically what happens is when I have written down an idea, it typically will lead me back to, oh, I think I read this in this book, right? And then I will go back and I'll sort through. But because of the frequency of my reading and note taking, it tends to have worked out that I will remember pretty quickly, not necessarily what the number of the card was, but at least where I read it, right? So then I can actually figure that out and go from there. But once you've taken that first step, guess what? Everything links back to each other, right? So it's weirdly convenient. And again, it will probably only really make sense once you've practiced it once or twice, but it's super useful. Okay. Is it possible for input? Yes, I can totally do that. In fact, I will do that right now. So I'm not going to link to the note card system because that's the one I found relatively useless. But these are the resources for the systems that these are the resources for the Zettelkasten system that I enjoyed. Okay. All right, here you go. Okay. Cool. All right. Any other questions about anything really? We've spent some time together now, so. Okay. Cool. You all were great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yushin.
This book is fun. John and Wayne, can I ask you to stay on for a second?
Yeah.
Great.
Let me do the outro and then I'll end the thing. So today we have only one more thing left, and it's Tim Hatch. He's going to launch his book in this, and he's going to read with Paul Tayar or Kareem Tayar. So come back at 5. It's going to be great. Both those writers I absolutely adore.
Thank you. Bye.
See you later.